All right, just another 10 or 15 seconds or so here. My name is David Bryan. I'm the Campaigns and Engagement Manager for the California Native Plant Society. And I'm so thrilled you're joining us here for our very first ever 360-degree tour. And we're going to be adventuring out today to Walker Ridge. And I'm delighted to be joined by our lead conservation scientist, Nick Jensen. Hi, Nick.
Hi, David.
And we're also joined by Sarah Husby. She is the campaign coordinator for the Protect Walker Ridge campaign, and she's been in the environmental nonprofit world for over 10 years. So thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Thanks, David, for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you both, and we're about to begin. So without further ado, we are going to go to Walker Ridge. So we're here at our very first habitat, and what we're going to be doing tonight is looking through several different panoramas. And as we do so, we'll be observing some really cool plants, some really cool landscapes, and I'm going to be asking our experts here, Sarah and Nick, some questions as we immerse ourselves here in the Walker Ridge landscape. So this is a really, really gorgeous stand of blue oaks. It really feels like a forest, and it indeed is in many ways. Nick, can you talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing here? What are these blue oak species, and can you describe them from a botanical perspective?
Sure, yeah, so blue oak is kind of, I would say, one of the quintessential oaks of our foothill habitats in California. They kind of, they're and I guess they're in other places as well, but you can think of it as like a ring around the Central Valley. And so here we are in the inner coast ranges on Walker Ridge, and this wonderful patch, this wonderful woodland of blue oaks. And this was taken just a couple weeks ago when David and I and a couple others went up to the ridge, and you can see that the oaks are starting to lose their leaves. So this is one of our deciduous oaks, so meaning that it doesn't keep its leaves year round, and it's forming a relatively dense patch in this place. It's not uncommon for blue oak to grow in pretty dense patches in a lot of places.
Right, I was going to ask you, I mean, the growth forms of this forest, it seems more dense than some other type of oak woodlands. I'm thinking of like the coast live oaks and along the Coast Range and into Southern California. These have a more distinct character in the way that they're growing. Is that something that you recognize too?
Well, yeah. So I mean, there are definitely places in California where blue oaks get to be quite large and kind of form that, like those stands where there's these big specimen trees separated from other specimen trees. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to say why this is the case in this place. It could just be that the growing conditions are quite tough there. Maybe there's some underlying conditions in the soil or something else that's going on in the environment that is causing them to grow smaller and denser. It could be land management history. It could be fire. There could be a whole host of reasons why this is a dense forest of smaller trees. But I would say that, and I'm not sure in this exact instance if this is the case, but there have been some studies of these smaller blue oaks, and sometimes they can be very, very old. So they can grow very slowly for a very long period of time. And so what appears to be a young tree might not actually be that young.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I wanted to toggle a few things here, a few different species of animals that interact with this blue oak woodland. This here is the California sister butterfly, a really beautiful species of pollinator here. And then we also have an amazing acorn woodpecker. So what I love, I've heard that blue oak woodlands have been compared to coral reefs in the number of animal species that they support. So these are true biodiversity powerhouses. And Sarah, I just wanted to ask you, and maybe your experiences with Walker Ridge or just California oak woodlands in general, what are just some kind of anecdotal experiences that you might encounter under the canopy of these beautiful oaks?
You hear an entire wide variety of wildlife. You can hear the multiple different birds in the trees. You'll see the different types of butterflies and damselflies in the area, because Walker Ridge is very rich for that. There's over 80 species of damsel and dragonflies in the area.
Wow.
You would have knowledge of potential other wildlife based on tracks in the region, and also scat that may be left. So it's just a very hopping type of place in the oak woodlands.
Right, that's amazing. And Nick, so there's more than meets the eye here, and we'll probably find that out more and more at Walker Ridge as we adventure today. But what's going on in this understory? It's not all quite what it probably seems, right?
Yeah, David, there's an element of well, I don't know if it's misconception. I don't know what the right word is, but a lot of times people see the golden hills of California, and they're referring to these this dense growth of grasses that browns up and turns tan in the summer.
Right.
And these are almost always when you're seeing that kind of habitat, non-native grasses that have arrived here mostly from Europe and Asia. And so in many cases, I think what we're seeing here in this photo is some wild oats of the genus Avena, some bromes of the genus Bromus. And these are kind of some of our ubiquitous non-native grasses that often are unfortunately too common in the understory of our oak woodlands. Now, later on in this tour, we'll see a place where there's what appears to be the same thing is not quite, and it's just it's a bunch of native plants. Now, there can be a lot of native grasses in these native annual wildflowers and bulbs in these habitats too. So it's important, I would say, not to just write off these kind of annual grasslands as just being waste places or anything like that.
Sure.
And I would say these grasses arrived here a long time ago. These were some, they arrived with the first kind of European visitors of California. They found some of these non-native grasses in the adobe bricks associated with missions when they were constructing those places.
Wow.
So these were arriving really early on, and they've spread everywhere in a sense. And were transported by livestock. Sometimes they were planted intentionally. Other times they arrive potentially on vehicle tires. And so it's part of our, botanical landscape that is very common and maybe not so good from a habitat perspective in a lot of ways.
Right. I think it's a really good example of the ways, kind of a metaphor, or actually a very literal example, that Walker Ridge is connected to us, to the legacies here in California. This invasive grass managed to get all the way out here to Walker Ridge, which we might consider remote, but it's actually all interconnected in many different ways. And I think this invasive grass is a great example of the ways that our habitats, are interconnected or intertwined with our actions and also history.
Yeah, that's a good point. And everything truly is connected, right? I mean, I think a lot of maybe some of the viewers of this presentation today have visited Bear Valley, which is very close to Walker Ridge, a very famous place for wildflowers. And we'll probably see, I think we'll see Bear Valley from above today on our tour. And so this is just an example of really, I love to think of places as connected, and I think it's great that you pointed that out. And those connections occur in a multitude of ways, I would say.
Yeah, and so Sarah, I wanted to pose to you. We're seeing a very different habitat, and we're about to go to a place just like this. This is Chaparral behind the screen of blue oaks here. And so these habitats abut one another in really kind of sharp contrast, which is kind of amazing. And Walker Ridge just has so many different habitats quilted together like this. Can you tell us why, Walker Ridge is so important, especially as we'll get in later in this program? There's a looming threat of wind development, and we want to talk about the ways that our audience can support petitioning to save this important place. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important, Walker Ridge, in terms of its unique number of habitats?
Sure. So Walker Ridge has a lot of diversity when it comes to it. It's at the intersections of the Klamath and the Bay Area ecosystems. A wise man once told me that it's an island in the sky. It's between Snow Mountain and the Blue Ridge Mountain Range. So it's its own little space where it has a unique ecosystem because of the serpentine soils, which we'll actually talk about a little bit later, which is found specifically in this area. Walker Ridge also is a wildlife corridor. It connects Snow Mountain Wilderness with the Cache Creek Wilderness and Cedar Ruffs Wilderness. So it's very important to this area to remain intact.
Right. Yeah, and I wanted to mention too, we talked about all the wildlife that depends on this blue oak woodland. Each one of these blue oak trees can support hundreds of different species of insects, birds, and associated fauna. And so just think about all of that magnified by the entire woodland here. And there's many different stands of blue oaks on Walker Ridge, and all the different habitats support different networks and ecosystems of life. So it's really just a veritable, oasis and refuge for so many different species of animals, in addition to all of the cool plants that we're seeing. All right, so we're going to go on to our next panorama here, much different in appearance. And so we're seeing a kind of the remains of a very large tree here, and it looks burnt, and it's surrounded by tons and tons of seedlings. So Nick, what exactly are we looking at here, this kind of hulk of dead wood?
Yeah, so it is, it's definitely a dead tree. And the dead tree that you're
Right.
looking at is a Mcnabb Cypress. And okay, so it would be tempting to say, oh, how sad that tree died. And I guess that is true, that it is sad that it died. But this was a Mcnabb Cypress that was the victim of a relatively recent wildfire. And our Mcnabb cypresses are conifers. They don't have flowers, they have cones in which they bear seeds, right?
Right.
And those seeds that are, and we'll probably see this later on a little bit. Oh, that's excellent. Good way to cue that up, David. That's amazing. So there's some cones of our Mcnabb cypress. So these cones they're held on these trees for a long period of time. So here you have a tree that could grow maybe 20 feet tall, bearing potentially hundreds of cones, all laden with seeds. And what happens is when a fire sweeps through this habitat, and fire is a pretty natural part of these ecosystems, it occurs at a pretty somewhat predictable interval and probably in the order of maybe 30 or so years, maybe a little bit longer. Those trees are burned and they are killed. But in the process of that, all that heat from that fire, those cones will open up and those seeds will rain down on the landscape. And I think, we can point to some of these small Mcnabb cypress.
Hey.
There they are. So there you can see all around there. Like when David and I were there, we were walking through this literal, this miniature forest of Mcnabb cypress seedlings.
Right.
All of these seedlings germinated post-fire. So what was really, in a way, an act of death for that mother tree was essentially rebirth for that habitat. So as those seeds fell from that now dead tree and were dispersed on the landscape, you have this huge flush of growth of these young seedlings, which will then become the next forest of Mcnabb cypress. And so I think it's important to think about this landscape as not a static one. When you visit a landscape in California, it's not always going to be the same, because there are these things like fires that do sweep through the landscape, and they're very natural. And as long as they're occurring in the right scale and at the right interval and at the right intensity, meaning that they're not too far out of whack, they are entirely natural and can actually promote the plants that are actually ultimately killed by the fire in the first place.
Right. Yeah, and there's so many amazing examples of plant adaptations here at Walker Ridge in regards to fire. And so this landscape, fire is an integral piece of it. And I think we'll see that play out in a number of different plant adaptations that we'll talk about. And I just think that's really quite amazing. And yeah, like when we were there, and as the audience is seeing right now, this kind of miniature forest of Mcnabb cypresses was really like impenetrable. It took quite a lot of bravery to like get through this dense thicket. Nick, ultimately, I don't think all of these cypresses will survive. What, as you're saying, in kind of the natural rhythm of things, what's expected to happen in this evolving landscape over time? Yeah,
well, what you would expect to happen is that all those seedlings will be competing with one another for light and for nutrients and water and all those things. And so not all of them will live. So you'll have you'll have a number of them that will be able to grow up to maturity and become these trees that bear seeds and then are the next generation. So over time, that cornfield of seedlings that we walk through, David, won't look that way. It'll look more like the forest that we'll see later on.
Right, because it's not as if you see tons and tons of these gigantic kind of holes of dead trees around us here. It's just this one that made it to that level of maturity, and then fire ripped through, and a response to that is all of these seedlings popping up. So it's kind of a dramatic shift. Just from one dead plant can come all of these amazing, all of these seedlings popping up. Sarah, I want to turn to you because it might not seem that interesting just at face value, but we're looking at some pretty unique rocks that ultimately contribute to a really unique soil type here at Walker Ridge. Can you talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing?
Sure. So actually the rocks that you're seeing on the ground is serpentine soil. And one interesting fact about that is serpentine soil is the official state rock of California. But serpentine is very poor in calcium and other major plant nutrients. So it's actually a lot of plants can't grow on it. It's very toxic. It has chromium, nickel, and asbestos in it. So only specific species, as Nick was saying, can grow in this area. It's a greenish gray color. It's actually kind of slippery in feel and very smooth in certain areas of it.
That's amazing. I mean, God, these plants have to tolerate with so much fire and insanely nutrient poor soil. It kind of makes you respect them quite a bit to know all of the tribulations they put up with. But of course, I don't think they. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
No, it's definitely a tough landscape. But that's in a lot of ways what makes this place special. I mean, it's you wouldn't have such amazing habitats if you didn't have that underlying soil, those underlying soil conditions, substrate conditions. In a lot of ways, so when we saw that first, when we went to that first place, and there was the dense growth of non-native grasses, you don't see that in very highly those substrates that are highly influenced by serpentinite rock or other ultramafic rocks that are the relatives of serpentine in a sense. And so it is those very hostile soil conditions that promote a lot of these very unique native plants over the non-native ones. And so what we have is this harsh conditions promoting some of the most special habitats in California, and that repeats itself in other parts of the state as well. Walker Ridge happens to be a tremendous example of a matrix of various serpentine habitats. It's a tremendous place.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to point out another really special plant here. This is Ceanothus jepsonia, and look at those gorgeous flowers coming out in spring.
Right. Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about this plant, Nick, in the context of Walker Ridge, serpentine soils, and fire?
Yeah. So Jepson ceanothus. It was named after the man who is associated with Willis Lynn Jepson, who is associated with our Jepson manual, which is kind of the foremost resource that people are using nowadays to identify plants. So it has a history of that as far as its name is concerned. Jepson ceanothus is really kind of a regional endemic. It's endemic to California. It doesn't occur anywhere else, but it really is only restricted to kind of the Napa, Lake, Sonoma County area, and maybe a few adjacent counties, but it's really that region where it is found. And not only is it typically restricted to that geographic range, it's also really it's almost always found on ultramafic soil, those serpentine type soils. So, and it's you can see it, of course, we took this tour in the winter, so there are no flowers, but in a few months, those plants will be covered in these beautiful kind of lilac colored flowers, which are excellent food for pollinators. So the point is that each of these plants in this landscape combine to create habitat, and that is just habitat for animals and pollinators, and it is it is, everything is of course very, very much connected.
Right, right. All right, so we're going to go on to our, well, actually, before we do that, Elizabeth, would you mind letting me know if anybody's asked any questions in our chat box?
Yeah, let's see. We have one Q&A. So someone wants to know, when was the last fire on Walker Ridge?
So
sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh yeah, no problem. So in the last 20 years, there's actually been 6 fires up in the Walker Ridge area. And to my knowledge, the most recent one is the Eagle Fire, which happened back in 2018.
Okay, great. And someone's hoping that, I don't know if we're able to do this, but someone would love to see larger pictures of the flowers. Definitely something you could watch is our Obi Kaufman webinar we did. We definitely showed there's a little bit more in there. And then, so if any other attendees have questions, feel free to use the Q&A.
Yeah, and I would say, like, I don't want to commit us to doing something, but I think we really should do a spring wildflowers presentation.
Yes.
I mean, I want to go. From a very selfish perspective, I want to go up to Walker Ridge and do one of these for when there's flowers.
Absolutely. No, we'll be taking you back to Walker Ridge. I'm sure of it. All right, so we're going to go on to our next landscape, and again, it's going to look different. Each one of these landscapes, there's kind of subtle variations at times. It's also immensely different habitats, which I think makes Walker Ridge so special, that you can traverse Walker Ridge Road and encounter all of these different habitats and all the amazing, remarkable plants that are part of those habitats. So here we're looking at another kind of form of grassland, another meadow, but it is composed of different plants. And so it might not look quite as festively alive as it will in a couple months. But Nick, I'm hoping you might be able to talk to us a little bit about what is going on in this meadow, botanically speaking.
Sure. Yeah. So there's some good cues from the photos that you're showing there. So this is an example of an area where the influence of those serpentine soils is quite strong. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at the skeletons of these wildflowers that were remaining. They're members of the sunflower family and the phlox family and various others. There was virtually, I don't think I could. There was even some native annual grasses, this Festuca microstachys, and so I don't think I could find a skeleton of a non-native plant in this location. And so, what we have here is this very open habitat that would be literally splashed in color from wildflowers in a good year when there's ample rainfall. And many of the plants that grow in these type of habitats are the same, from that same suite of serpentine endemic plants. So these plants that grow nowhere else, no other habitat on Earth. Really, most of them are endemic to California. They grow nowhere else, and they only grow in these serpentine habitats. Some of them are quite rare. Some of them are intrinsically rare in that they are just they've always been that way. Some of them are rare because of our own actions, so the things that humans have done to the landscape. But this is just, just think about it. We have been 3 places and 3 drastically different habitats. So
right.
And then I wanted to say, and we'll talk about, you've probably seen it already, but the views from Walker Ridge, this is an immensely beautiful landscape. And it's accessible. So pretty much anybody, I think you could probably take a passenger car up there. What do you think, David? Probably, yeah.
It'd be a little rugged, but you could.
Be a little rugged. If you were okay with that, you probably could get up there. And this is one of to me, the amount of serpentine habitat and the variety of habitats that you can see in this location, and how accessible it is, and in a short drive from the Bay Area or Sacramento, this is a piece of habitat, a part of our legacy that is really, really, to my mind, irreplaceable. It should be cherished, and it certainly is. We are cherishing it here tonight, but the society as a whole really should cherish this place, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of to the factors I was discussing, or we were all talking about earlier, fire, the really unique ultramafic soils here, those have contributed over time to the amazing array of plants that we're seeing. And I think that therein lies the beauty, that the beauty of these plants, the aesthetics, just the gorgeous nature of them emerge from that coevolution with an adaptation for these really incredible environmental forces, whether that's wildfire, whether that's the serpentine soils. And so, you know, you might have to adjust your perspective a little bit about traditional beauty, but when you start to perceive what these plants go through and how they arrive visually at the way they look today in these amazing landscapes, you know, understanding where they came from and how they evolved, I think adds to their beauty and adds a really interesting dimension to them as we appreciate them, you know, as kind of botanical connoisseurs and also just as people that, you know, enjoy nature. So it's a really special place for that reason, I think. Yeah. Sarah, I wanted to talk to you. I think I kind of want to go back to your comment about an island in the sky, because I think that term is so applicable, island, because in addition to its elevation, you know, Nick, you're also talking about serpentine. Serpentine habitats are scattered in piecemeal fashion across the state. Is that right? In various locales, which can make it hard for plants that are adapted to serpentine soils to essentially, I don't want to use the word communicate, but they really become islands. They become ecological refuges because they're distant and far apart. Is that a correct way of describing serpentine habitat?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, the serpentine habitats do occur. I wouldn't say statewide. They really are more of a central and northern California thing.
Okay.
There's a little bit of serpentine in Southern California, but it's really and really they're generally in kind of our lower elevations, not always, but because sometimes up in the Klamath, I mean, like if you've ever been up to Mount Eddy, there's serpentine that's essentially alpine. So wow. And yeah, they often occur it does occur in patches, sometimes in larger patches than others. For example, the Walker Ridge serpentine is a huge patch of this habitat. And so it certainly does. I would say the patchiness does promote some you know, micro diversity, or like some speciation effects as well. So yeah, so I would say also, like, you know, it's a part of our botanical and ecological heritage that is probably a bit underappreciated. Not a lot of people want to go frolicking in the Chaparral for good reason. It's a little bit tough to walk through. But at the same time, I think if you like you said, if you adjust your expectations a little bit, or what you perceive as classically beautiful, I think this is for me, it is one of my favorite habitats. It's as beautiful as any other habitat in the state. I won't pick one over the other though, because I love them all.
That's beautiful. Well, Sarah, sorry, back to you. I wanted to get back to islands, and I think it's probably important to let our viewers know, you know, kind of where Walker Ridge is situated geographically speaking. So I pulled out Bear Valley here. We're looking east. So can you tell us, you know, where exactly is Walker Ridge located in the world, you know, geographically? Sure.
Yep. So the first thing is that I think is important for our viewers to know is that Walker Ridge is managed by the Bureau of Land Management. So it's actually a federal public lands situated between Lake and Colusa counties. It's right off of Highway 20 of Walker Ridge Road, so it's easy to access for folks. It's adjacent to the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, which was designated in 2015. It's only an hour and a half from Sacramento, so it's actually pretty close drive to a major city. The Mendocino National Forest is to the north. As you were mentioning, David, Bear Valley is to the east, which is a great location to be able to view flowers, sorry. And we have a lot of people come out and do that in the spring season. And then to the south, you have Knoxville and the Cache Creek Wilderness area. So it's kind of smack dab right in the middle of the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument and part of the Inner Coast Range area.
Awesome, thank you. All right, any questions, Elizabeth, for us as we look out on this habitat here?
Yeah, we have a few questions. Someone earlier asked, do any animals eat the young cypress plants?
That's a good question. I would imagine that they are browsed on by some of our native herbivores like deer. I don't know for certain. That's something we could certainly look up. I'm sure, and I actually this is a stretch for me because I'm just a pure botanist here. But I think I believe there are butterflies whose larvae feed on the cypress.
Yes.
Is
No,
that correct?
you're absolutely right. I don't know about the Mcnabb cypress in particular, but I know that there are tecate cypresses, which are down in Southern California, and I think that's Hesperocypress Forbesii, I think.
That's correct, yeah.
But okay, great. So I'm right about that. But there are butterfly species that host on it, and that's another reason of conservation concern, because if a wildfire destroys the remnants of the tecate cypresses, there goes the butterflies that are adapted to eat that very particular cypress. So I am curious to know, and that's something we can dig in a little bit, if there are some butterflies or other insects that host specifically on the Mcnabb cypress that occur here.
Awesome. Another plant-related question. Are we seeing any certain pine species spotted across the landscape?
Yes. Oh, good eye. Yeah, we're just about to get there, and I think that's probably a great segue. So Nick, do you mind talking to us about the pines that we're seeing here?
Yeah, we're seeing, our gray or ghost pines that are quite common in or they also call it foothill pine, a plant that grows in our foothill habitat. I would say it has some of the most unique shape of any pine tree in the state. They all have their own personality, whereas when you look at like a ponderosa pine, which is your classically conical conifer, these guys don't do that, and these are certainly, and they're kind of widely spaced, and across this landscape, which is just indicating that they're probably competing for resources with all the other plants, and there isn't the resources for them to be too closely spaced. This is the same type of plant. It has as our Mcnabb cypress. So these also have in the same lineage. They're conifers. They bear cones as well, and so no flowers on these. Truly one of my top favorite pines in the state of California.
That's awesome. The common name really does, to me, describe the kind of effect that you get. One of the common names is ghost pine, and the long kind of gray-green needles, when they shimmer in the light, they're not very dense in terms of the needles, so it just gives this very phantasmic look as you're driving through the foothills of the Sierras or of the Coast Range. You kind of get this really ethereal kind of quality as you look at the pine. You can almost see it here. They kind of look like, I'm using all the ghost words I know. They look like apparitions in the landscape, but really, really cool effect there. And I'm going to turn to one more plant before we hop to our next habitat, and that's this beautiful shrub here. Nick, can you tell us what plant this is?
So there is, of course, Manzanita. So our most one of our most famous groups of shrubs in the state, of course, is Manzanita. It's a member of some people don't know, the blueberry family. Can you imagine that they have a lot of these native blueberry relatives. These are plants that, of course, not blooming at this point in time. It blooms very early. In fact, you'll find these plants in bloom in January, visited by our native bumblebees. It is and there are a variety of them on Walker Ridge. So some of them are actually killed by fire and seed, just like the Mcnabb cypress. Other species resprout from what we call burls, or these underground storage structures that are that are essentially evolved to survive fire, in which the plants resprout thereafter. So Manzanita is a truly wonderful group of plants.
Yeah, and they do have edible fruit. So, it is kind of, you kind of get that blueberry sense because they produce these wonderful miniature apples, Manzanita, so Spanish for little apple. And those come out kind of during the summer. I actually saw a couple of the shrubs still with the fruit on them here at Walker Ridge. But as Nick mentioned, they bloom January, February, thereabouts, kind of late winter, very earliest spring. And of course, they're famous garden specimens. So maybe not this very particular species, but many Manzanitas are just absolutely great for your garden. And they have this gorgeous red bark, as this image illustrates here. And they, just have a beautiful form. They kind of look like bonsai, even when they're mature. So a really, really beloved plant of the chaparral and other ecosystems in California. And it's cool to see them at Walker Ridge. All right, so we're gonna go to our next place, and it's kind of stark, but I think there's an important message here to see. And so we're definitely looking at the remnants of a burnt landscape here. And as we look across the ridge, we see a really interesting kind of thing happening. This is a fire line or fire break. Sarah, you mentioned it in response to one of our viewers' questions. Can you just give a very brief history of fire at Walker Ridge?
Sure. So fire at Walker Ridge, actually, as Nick has been mentioning, is natural. It happens in cycles. And so we've had several major fires. The two larger ones that's happened in the last several years has been the Ranch and Pawnee fires, which really went through and caused some devastation, but it's going to help regenerate and regrow the area with new plants for Walker Ridge. And so, it's just a matter of time when different areas of Walker Ridge are going to burn again, or for the first time in a certain amount of years. And so it's natural for the landscape in this region.
Right. Thank you. Thanks. That's really good information. And Nick, I think we could turn back. This was one of the very same trees we were looking at just before, or one of the same specimens of a ghost pine. Of course, it's burnt. But I think it's a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about fire adaptation in plants. So can you talk about this really fun word called serotiny and how it relates to these pine trees?
Yeah, I mean, so this is, serotiny. Actually, I wish I knew the origin of that word. I'm sure that would be good to know. But so there are a whole group of plants, usually referred to, they call them Serotoninous Conifers, or plants, or they are conifers that are essentially are fire loving. Not really fire loving. It's hard to say that they would love fire if they're killed by it. But they require fire for their regeneration. Now, our grape pines or ghost pines, I think on occasion will drop their cones and drop seeds and germinate without fire. But very often that is the case, that the cones will be held on their branches, only to be opened by the heat of the fire, raining seeds down, and creating the opportunity for the next generation to germinate and create a new forest. So this is not necessarily bad. It's bad for the individual, but not for the habitat, right? So of course that individual plant has been killed, but the habitat continues on in the next generation.
Right. Also seeing some really cool serpentine rocks here.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
Yeah. Elizabeth, any questions for us before we go on to our next panorama?
Yeah, we have a few if we have some time.
Sure.
I'm going to combine two questions, kind of just throw them out there to talk. Someone wanted to know, what are the scattered trees in the background of photos? That was about 10 minutes ago, so it might have been some different images. They said they seem evenly spaced apart. Can you comment on that? And then another person asked, the landscape seems to switch to grassland at the ridge tops above the pine chaparral. They're asking if that is a correct statement. So I'll put that out there and see if y'all can answer those.
Yeah, you go ahead, Nick. I think you'd be better to answer that.
Well, so I think the scattered trees were the gray pines or ghost pines, foothill pine. The species, the name of the species is Pinus sabiniana. If you want to nerd out on scientific names, and I think that that observation of the switching to grassland on the ridgetops, I think is fairly accurate. Those are places where the soil is going to be very thin, and so I think that is one of those driving factors. I will say that I'm not sure that that's an exclusive characteristic of Walker Ridge, but I think that observation is relatively correct. That one thing that is certain is that where you have really thin soils and the strong influence of the serpentine substrate, that it's likely that you're going to have a herbaceous plant dominated habitat versus one that's dominated by shrubs or with scattered pine trees or Mcnabb cypress trees.
Awesome.
Awesome. And then Sarah, do you know what is the historical frequency of fire at Walker Ridge? So I know we talked about 2018 being one of the most recent years, but are you able to talk about going a little bit farther back?
No,
Okay.
to be honest with you. I'm just more familiar with the more recent fires in the area.
Okay.
Nick, could you maybe talk about like fire cycles in Chaparral at large? I know it's, each location's unique, and serpentine soils are also another factor here, but perhaps the kind of typical fire cycle in a Chaparral landscape.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just talk really generally about some fire. I like to think of this as that there are various ways that plants deal with fire. There is one is surviving it. So some of our, for instance, like in the Sierra Nevada, ponderosa pine trees, some of our other conifers, as long as the fire isn't too severe, they'll live right through it. And if you're in the Coast Ranges, if you've ever gone to the redwood forest, you'll see these big scars where a fire has burned and even cut away at the bark and some of the wood of that tree, and the plant is doing just fine. So there's the survivors, the ones that survive through it. There are plants that don't survive and then have to reseed back into the landscape from an adjacent area. That's another way that plants are able to adapt to fire. There are the plants that are ones that will resprout. So I talked about some of our manzanitas, some of many of our shrub species in California, especially chaparral shrub species, will have an underground storage structure, root system, however you would like to think of it, that will be able to just essentially the top growth will be killed, and then those plants will resprout right after the first rain. Some plants will be kind of lurking in the seed bank. So the fire sweeps through, the seeds are in the seed bank. Maybe it's an annual plant that had gone dormant long, that had sent its seed to the soil a while ago, and those will just resprout in the following seasons. So this is the story of our landscapes in California is inextricably tied to the story of fire. And probably the majority of plants in California, especially at lower elevations, have developed ways to deal with this cycle of fire. So it's kind of this, it's kind of hard to really initially wrap your mind around, because you think like we're kind of trained to think that fire is bad as humans, because it is kind of a pretty rough thing. But our native plants kind of think differently in a lot of ways, I would say, and our habitats too.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue. I'm going to use that opportunity to go to our next slide, because here's where we're going to talk about a couple shrubs specifically, and we can get into a little bit about their fire adaptation. So I want to start with what probably doesn't look all of that exciting, because let's give it a break. It's recovering from a fire. But I wanted to talk about this sweet shrub here. We call it a condominium of life. This is a leather oak. And so when you say oak tree, most of us probably conjure images of a majestic tree with a beautiful sprawling canopy. Well, oaks come in many shapes and sizes. So this leather oak is a pretty scrubby a shrub here. Nick, can you talk to us a little bit about leather oak in the context of Walker Ridge?
Yeah, so this is so yeah, like David said, not all oaks are trees. This is our leather oak, or Quercus dorata is the scientific name. Quercus means fine tree, if my brain is still working this late in the day. And even though this is not a tree, it's still a fine plant. So here you have another one of our shrubs, which is pretty much, I don't know if I hate using the word always or restricted, but it is a very often associated with our ultramafic habitats like serpentine. So this is one of our really special plants. It has acorns just like your regular oak trees do. And so this is something that if you visit serpentine habitats, you're going to very often see our leather oak. I see a very pretty chunk of serpentine there that we're seeing there too. So growing right on top of kind of out of serpentine rock. So this is a plant that is is adapted to these serpentine habitats. It doesn't need the serpentine soil. It can grow off of it, but because the serpentine habitat is such a kind of a tough place for other plants to grow, it's able to compete there where it might not be able to compete in a more in a more kind of fertile habitat that is where generalist plants can grow. Plants that are
great point. Right, and so here we have another one. This is Yerba Santo, which is sacred herb, and it is a very important plant culturally, spiritually for many California Native American groups, and it has a very, very strong aroma. In fact, it actually does truly smell like medicine if you've ever kind of rubbed the leaf. Very kind of pungent, kind of powerfully scented shrub. Nick, can you talk to us a little bit about the plant science of Yerba Santo?
Yeah, so that's well, I mean, so to use the scientific name, because we're botanists love throwing names out. Aerodictyon californicum it's a a really cool shrub. It's pretty widespread. So as opposed to some of the other plants that we've talked about, this is not really one of our serpentine endemics. It's a plant that grows in various habitats in the state. It has these kind of wonderful white to lilac flowers. Other members of this genus have bright purple flowers. Just it's a pretty cool plant in all around. I'm always happy when I get to see and smell Aerodictyon. Kind of has very sticky leaves. It's kind of it's just it's pretty and it grows in some tough conditions. This is and also I think it does quite well following fire as well. So it resprouts after fire. So it's much like the rest of the plants on Walker Ridge. They've had to deal with fire in their history, and this is a good habitat for them.
Right. So we're looking over at Indian Valley Reservoir, and so big body of water here. Can you, Nick, just share a little bit about the watershed here and why Walker Ridge is important in that regard?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we've talked about connectedness a lot in this presentation, and how one place is truly it really can't be severed from the larger landscape. We can't pick out any place without connecting it to anything else. I mean, that was kind of paraphrasing John Muir a bit, but the the Walker Ridge is the high point in the landscape in a lot of ways in the surrounding landscape, and it actually forms kind of the top of a watershed. So meaning that so here you see a reservoir, right? So it's not a natural body of water, but it's one thing that you can kind of focus on is the fact that this intact habitat, this intact landscape is contributing to the fact that to the connectedness downstream. And so we have a kind of an example of how, in a way, how Walker Ridge not only connects to wild places, but is also in a way connected to some of the resources that we need as humans. Now, no, we're not, I'd say generally speaking, we're not super excited when an area is dammed and flooded. But a part of life in California is needing water, and so Walker Ridge plays a role there too. I would say in providing the resources that are the conditions that are necessary for watershed services as well.
Thanks, Nick. Elizabeth, any questions before we go to our last panorama?
Yeah, there's a few. Someone's wondering if there are wind adaptations of the plant, since we know that the area could be developed for wind power. So they're wondering, are there any that are wind adapted?
So, that's a good question.
Maybe their seeds are flying ones or something.
Yeah, I can speculate there. Yeah, so there are certainly a lot of plants that are dispersed by wind. Botanists call that anemochory. It's a term for dispersal via wind, unless I got that wrong. So I don't know of specific examples. I think a lot of you can sometimes tell that a seed is going to be dispersed by wind because it'll have appendages that look like feathers. So if anybody's ever seen mountain mahogany, the genus Cercocarpus, it literally looks like a feather, and that's a sure sign that a plant is going to be dispersed by wind, not really adapted to wind, but it will definitely need wind in order to be dispersed to the next location. Many of members of the sunflower family, we're all familiar with. Of course, with dandelions, if you haven't been a kid, if you haven't blown on the seeds from a dandelion, and you're actually acting as a wind dispersal agent at that point in time. Of course, our dandelions aren't a native plant necessarily, but a lot of they aren't a native plant. A lot of our native sunflowers are dispersed by wind as well. So yeah, there are plants that are kind of adapted to wind in a way.
Well, I'd posit too, right, that like the ghost pines, for instance, as conifers, would rely on wind to effectively reproduce. Is that correct?
Well, that is true because their pollen is distributed by the wind. So, right. I mean, so those cones, so the male cones, the male pollen cones, they basically, if there wasn't wind, if there wasn't air current carrying those pollen grains from one tree to another, they wouldn't be able to reproduce, or they wouldn't be able to share their genetic resources with their neighbors.
Right. Well, and Sarah, can you talk a little bit about, maybe you can share a little bit about the fact that wind recordings in Walker Ridge, there's been, I think, over 5 development projects that have threatened Walker Ridge with wind turbines. And the readings have actually come up somewhat mediocre. So I think there's also a question here about how effective Walker Ridge would be for wind energy. And wind isn't, say, as intense as you might expect. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. This is actually, right now, we have a 4th proposal for an industrial wind development project on Walker Ridge. And every time, for a reason, they haven't moved forward. And it's because the wind on Walker Ridge is very mild to moderate. It's not sustainable for an economic project to make money. And so Walker Ridge is just the wrong place for a type of project like this. Environmental groups believe in renewable energy, but renewable energy in the right places. And Walker Ridge is just not that right place.
Right. I'm going to go to our last slide here because I think that's a perfect moment, and we'll catch some last questions after that. And this slide just has these beautiful Mcnabb cypresses here. I mean, these are more mature specimens, and given the tough conditions we've been talking about, fire, the serpentine soils, the age of these cypresses, and I can't date them. I'm not there as a dendrochronologist, but I would argue that they're probably pretty old. They probably experienced quite a lot. And so here we are looking over towards Bear Valley, these beautiful ridge lines. And so all tonight we've been talking about how special Walker Ridge is as a place, and also the fact that there's this looming threat, this wind development that could possibly put big wind turbines and roadways and power lines, all sorts of development that would eat into this very special habitat, and also affect the wildlife corridors that this place provides. So Sarah, can you talk to us about kind of the existential threat here and also what's at stake?
Sure. So there's actually, in my opinion, three major areas that are at stake. The first one, as you kind of already touched on, David, which is the harm to wildlife and rare plants. As we've talked about, this serves as a wildlife corridor connecting the Mendocino National Forest and Snow Mountain Wilderness to the Cache Creek Wilderness in the Knoxville area in the south. Walker Ridge is abundant for wildlife. We have rare species here, the Northwest pond turtle, foothill yellow-legged frog. We have the cute California newt. There's 6 globally rare insects. As I mentioned earlier, 80 different species of butterflies and different damsel and dragonflies in the area. Not to forget about the common black bear and mountain lion that call Walker Ridge home. And as Nick's kind of touched on with the species, there's at least 27 rare plants that we're aware of on Walker Ridge. So that's one of the areas that is a threat if the projects move forward. Another one is public safety. You know, we've been talking about wildfire, but when you have these major construction projects going on up there, you do have to really worry what kind of wildfires could happen, you know, due to the equipment that's being put up in place. You know, it's a very dry condition in that area. Hazardous soils is a factor in Walker Ridge. You know, this is a very remote spot and the ridges are narrow in certain places and they're looking to put wind turbines in those spaces. It's unstable serpentine soil rocks, which is influenced by plate tectonic movement. So you have a slow, constant movement in this area affecting the region. And there's also abandoned mercury mines, which a lot of people may not know mercury was mined in the Inner Coast Range area. And finally, recreation is at risk with the wind development project. This area is currently designated as a multiple use recreation space by the Bureau of Land Management. It's actively used by hikers, hunters, campers, birders, botanists, and legal OHV users. So it's a very popular spot for recreation. If a wind development project was to happen, there's a possibility that they would convert the land along Walker Ridge Road and Bartlett Springs Road and restrict use to the public. It wouldn't be available the way it is. And it also would impede some of these most incredible views that we're seeing today. Walker Ridge is accessible by car. And, you know, we need to take into consideration folks who can't go out and do these rugged hikes, or driving and having a scenic tour is the way that they can go out and experience our public lands. So that's really important that we don't lose that type of recreation and exposure to people in our community.
Thank you, Sarah. That was amazing. Nick, do you want to share any kind of last thoughts as a botanist who you know you're very affected by Walker Ridge? Anything that you can share to our viewers as we close out here?
You know, I mean, I think of Walker Ridge as a place where you really can appreciate the multiple levels of habitats and of experience in the landscape. It is a place where you can go and not really know a whole lot about habitats or the various 27 rare species that occur there, and be awed by the beauty of the views. I think this is probably one of the places in California with some of the most expansive and best views I can think of. I mean, there's great viewscapes all over California, but this is just, to me, is truly spectacular. You can appreciate habitats. So it's easy to appreciate all the myriad habitats that occur on Walker Ridge, from chaparral to woodland to the cypress forest, to those habitats that are dominated by native herbaceous plants. And then you can drill down into the micro details. You could spend hours just picking your way in one of those places dominated by herbaceous serpentine endemic plants, and try to learn all of those plants and appreciate that level of diversity. So Walker Ridge, I would say, has something for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for us to keep it that way. Our public lands are like our BLM lands are for all of us. And we all deserve the opportunity to appreciate places like Walker Ridge. And if this area were, in the very worst scenario, to become industrialized in the form of wind energy development, that would be a tragedy. It's something that we shouldn't allow to happen. And so as you know, you join us at CNPS in signing our petitions. We'll have some actions to take as we go on this campaign. And we aren't going to rest until this place is truly conserved. And then we can also work on some of the things to do with management to make sure the habitat is managed and appreciated and interpreted as it should be. And so, so this is a long process. It's been going on for a long time. CNPS and others, you know, botanists have been visiting this place for decades and trying to keep it, trying to study it, and trying to preserve it. And that's not over. And I think that I will see, at least in my career here as a conservationist, a time where this is either designated as an area of critical environmental concern by the BLM, or maybe as added to Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, or in some other ways is designated for its best purpose, which is multiple uses, with the foremost use being conservation and appreciation.
Thanks, Nick. Well, thank you both, Nick and Sarah, for your insights, for your time today. It was really a pleasure going out to Walker Ridge with you, and I hope our audience enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being our guides today.
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's always fun to do these things with you, and with Sarah. It's been wonderful working with you on this campaign.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So I want to go to our last slide here, which is a link to our petition. So you can take action now if you haven't already. You can go to cnps.org/protect Walker Ridge, and that's going to take you to a page where you can find the link to sign the petition. And we have over 3,000 signatures, and we hope to reach at least 5, which I think we can absolutely do with your help. So please take a chance to, in a moment, to sign the petition, and also to share it with people that you think would like to hear about Walker Ridge and protecting this really important habitat. There's also videos and other forms of engagement on that landing page so you can learn more about Walker Ridge. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night,
Thanks to all the
everyone.
participants. All right, bye.